Hello, everybody. This is Dean Smith from the Community of Human and Organizational Learning, and I'm just looking at my participant screen right now because I've just hit the Admit All button, and I want to make sure that we have everybody in the webinar before we get started, and it looks like we do. So thank you very much for joining us today, and thanks for taking the time to engage in this interesting discussion with Laura Flessner, the founder and CEO of MindTap. And Laura, before I turn it over to you, I'll hopefully preface your background, which I find really intriguing, which is all about innovation, both I think as a practitioner, how do you start looking for and bringing innovative ideas to an organization? And I think your latter work is focused on how do you help people, help coach others to believe in both their ideas and themselves and really bring them to reality, right? So you're touching on both innovation as a concept and human beings and how we process and learn and move forward, right?
Exactly.
So I'm glad I got that right. And Laura, thank you very much for taking the time today. And before I turn it over to you, I'll ask all the participants. Laura is going to write a lot on a board. So it would be very helpful if you go to the top right part of your screen. There we go, top right part of your screen in the view section, and click on the speaker view. So that way Laura and her diagrams will be front and center. So with that, Laura, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us.
I am so excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Dean. And I'm excited to have this chat with you, Dean, and also you, Bob, as well. Um, I love the focus that you guys have of really building resilient organizations and also a focus on human performance, right? Because that's something that I really find very important and interesting because people are really how things happen. So how do you really focus on making sure that you can optimize that? But I think also the data and analytics and kind of like that root cause analysis background that you guys you have. I'm an engineer by background. So like I heart that. So thank you for having me here with all of you in this wonderful community. Just for a quick background, I did work in corporate in the consumer goods and pharma space for over 17 years in the space of innovation. My background is engineering, it is technical based, but one of the things that I did, I spent most of my career doing actually is doing consumer interviews and understanding people so that I can understand what people did with products, what they wanted out of products, and be able to translate that design into technical specifications for the product designers. So I had to have, I call this language of the technical language and normal people language. And I was kind of that translator between both. I worked on brands like Metamucil and Vicks at Procter & Gamble and at Pfizer, Chapstick and Centrum and Advil. So maybe those are brands that you know, but I loved working on things that so many people could use and, makes their lives just a little bit better each day. But I could talk a lot about what I did in my innovation roles and that sort of thing, but that's not what I'm really going to talk about today because the topic is making ideas real, right? And ideas come from anywhere and everywhere. And often they come from really unexpected places and sometimes from unexpected places and people within the organization. So that's a big thing for a lot of leaders is how do you get those ideas brought forward? How do you get them to become real? And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. So to introduce that, I want to tell a quick little story of my experience of bringing one of my ideas to life. So this is going back to when I worked at Pfizer and I was in research and development. And I wasn't yet a director. I didn't have any like leadership position, political influence, we'll call it, within the organization yet. And I had this idea of building an innovation space because I was on a lot of innovation teams, and I'd worked at Procter & Gamble, who actually had a lot of innovation spaces, and I've experienced that and the benefit. And as I looked around at Pfizer, it was cubicle land. And I'm like, how can you be so innovative, creative, collaborative in a space like this? So I was really passionate about that. I just love innovation and just making things better, right? That's to me what innovation is. And want to make sure that we do that really well for people around the world. So I had this idea of an innovation space, and I shared it with so many people. And everyone I talked to, this is one of those non-controversial ideas, right? Some ideas are controversial, some aren't. This is one of those non-controversial ideas. Everyone said, this is an amazing idea. Yes, yes, and yes. And then I waited for it to happen, but nothing happened. Like, if it's such a good idea, why isn't this happening? Well, so I actually didn't do anything about it for a while. Um, it wasn't until I saw a colleague of mine who was in marketing, and also wasn't a director and had any, good special high level position. But he had an idea of creating an Asian leadership program within the organization. And I saw him create this thing where over 40 people from across Pfizer, and Pfizer's a big company, so there's lots of locations from across the US, flew to New York. So you had to get manager approval for the budget and the travel budget and the time to go across, and to New York. And they actually did that 3 times across the year. And I'm like, okay, if he could influence that, maybe I could do something about this innovation space. And so, long story short, once I decided to do this, I decided I was going to lead this innovation space. I was able to get stakeholder leadership, which was the president of the organization, $1.5 million and half of an office floor, which this was pre-COVID, right? So office floor was actually valuable space to completely reconstruct into an innovation space. And the first year that it opened, over 65 teams used it. And so it had an impact. And here I was being able to lead that without a leadership position in the organization. So this is what I want to talk about today, particularly, is how to make ideas real, ideas that you have that may not be part of your job description, or, if you're a leader in the organization, how you think about enabling others to be able to lead ideas that they have, that they're passionate about, that they know is going to make an impact in the organization, and be able to make that happen. So as we get into this topic of making your ideas real, I'm curious, for those of you that are here, thank you for being here, by the way. I know how valuable your time is, and being able to come and join us. I'm curious, what is it that you want to get out of this session, particularly about making your ideas real? So I'd love to hear about that. Go ahead and put that in the chat, because I want to make sure to address what you guys came here for. Alternatively, you can share maybe what your biggest challenge is in making your ideas real. So with that, while people are typing in, I didn't know, Dean or Bob, if you had any questions as people are thinking about that and putting it into the chat.
Yeah, thank you for asking. One that I find challenging, both as a leadership coach and as a leader myself, is how do you keep encouraging people to bring ideas forward? Because, to your point of, hey, we raise a great idea and it seems great and people go, yeah, love it, but maybe nothing happens. Like, how do you keep encouraging that thought, even if only 10% of them come to fruition? And now we're getting more into the chat box too, converting real ideas to ROI. Love to learn about how to encourage others to not sit back when they have ideas. influencing the ideas of positive change. So lots of great ideas or lots of great thoughts coming in here, Laura.
Yeah, this is amazing. And so a couple of these will definitely cover because I was going to share the process that I used because a lot of times this is really just like a big black box. It's like, okay, I have an idea. Now what do I do with it? Right? It's like,
Right.
how do you go from this idea to it actually being real in real life, being implemented? And so the first step, I'll use my little board here. There's 3 steps that I use. And also just to be clear, like this I've used within the innovation space, but I've also used it in nonprofits that I work in, and also actually at my church. I've used it to throw my mom's surprise 60th birthday party. I use it everywhere. So this process just works when you just have an idea and how do you just move forward with it. Some steps you don't need, some you do, depending on how big or where the idea is, right? So step 1 for the idea. This is where you want to make sure that I'm in speaker view on your thing with the top right button, speaker view, so you can see me. Step 1. Create a powerful idea, right? So leading an idea takes a lot of energy. I'm not going to lie. And it takes a lot of work. So if you're going to lead an idea, you want to lead a powerful one, one with high impact, one you know is going to make a difference. And this is related to that question of ROI too. This is going to help you sell it internally if you know it's powerful. So how do you make sure that it's a powerful idea? I use a 3 rings to help me set up a powerful idea. This center ring is the customer. Okay. So that says customer. The center ring is the customer. The idea, all ideas are to help make things better, right? It's usually solving a problem or making something better than it already is. But it's usually, I mean, it always is for people. It's making it better for people, and it's making things, making things better for people. So the customer is at the center of the idea. Who are you making the idea better for? And being clear on who that is going to make your idea even better, because that's where the impact is. If you don't know where the impact is going, then your idea isn't going to be powerful. So you need to know who it's impacting and be very clear on that. Sometimes we want to say, oh, it's going to impact everybody. This is going to make everybody's life better, which is great. And it might do that on a halo effect, but your idea is only powerful when it's very specific, when you know exactly who you're going to impact, because then you can design your solution for that person. Okay. So being very specific on who your customer is, understanding what their current situation is, what is their ideal situation, and being able to bring them there through the second ring, the solution. So the solution is all around the customer because the solution is literally helping the customer. Sometimes we start with a cool new technology or a cool new thing, that's the solution. And then you backtrack to, well, what is this actually doing? Who is it actually helping? You can do that. You can start there, but you need to remember that it all comes back to the customer. So that's why the customer is in the center. Now, the third ring is something that a lot of people miss. This is the operation. So this idea has to live within an organization, within a space. And so because it lives in the space, it needs to fit there. It needs to fit there so you can be sustainable, right? It can continue to run once it's made. And so being able to understand what value it brings the organization, where it lives within the organization, how it helps further the organization's mission, right? It needs to fit within all those things and bring that value, the ROI, to the organization. So for example, I was on a project within Pfizer. We were supposed to bring a new wellness product to market. And so we identified our customer, we identified a solution. It was amazing. It was so awesome. And it fit within the organization, but then the organization changed. There was new leadership and there was new strategic priorities. It no longer fit in the new strategic priorities. So the idea no longer fit in the organization. Okay. And it was canceled. So it's really important that it fits with the organization so it can continue to move forward. That's where you're going to get your resources and your support from. There's one more thing that's not in the rings that is also important for a powerful idea. And that is the idea is not about you. Because sometimes when we have an idea, it becomes our baby. And you want that baby to come to life exactly as you imagined it. But to have a powerful idea, it needs these three things. And these three things are not you. So instead of being connected to the idea, you're more connected to the outcome and the impact. So that when you learn more about what your customer wants, or you learn your solution doesn't quite work and you need to change it, you can change things within your idea. And that's the power of innovation, is being able to adapt and change. Okay, so that's step one, is creating a powerful idea. Okay. Step two is, I think it was in here as well, influencing the ideas. It goes to that part of it. Step two is about securing the people and the resources to make that idea happen. Right, so you have this powerful idea and it's just you and an idea. It's not going to happen with just you and the idea. You need people to be able to help you, and you need resources because you don't have to have resources to start with, right? I didn't have any budget, but I was able to secure it. So when you're looking to influence people, number one, you don't need everyone to like the idea. In my example, it was very just non-controversial, so it was okay. But you're going to have ideas that not everyone's going to like, right? New ideas. And that's how we're wired in our brains, right? We're not, right, in survival mode. Way back in caveman days, new things were a threat, right? They're a threat to your survival. So when new things come in, oftentimes it's blocked. And that's usually just how our brain works. And so you're going to encounter that when you have new ideas as well. But when you communicate your idea with people and with the passion and excitement that you have, you're going to find people that you connect with. You're going to find people that connect with your idea and that connect with you. It doesn't have to be everybody, but it does have to be some specific people. So you're going to be looking for people who become team members, who are willing to roll up their sleeves with you to do the work and get it done, right? Which is important to have help. You're going to look for stakeholders. Stakeholders are people with power, additional influence, and access to resources. You're also going to look for a decision maker. These are the people that can actually give you green lights, approvals, or the real access to the real money, right? So sometimes those are stakeholders, sometimes they're not. But making sure that as you share your idea, you're finding people in each one of these to be able to move forward. The stakeholders will be able to help you oftentimes access the decision makers in that going forward.
Laura, I have a question about stakeholders. Would you also maybe look at, not only those that have the resources or capabilities to make it a reality, would you also maybe consider those that might not be particularly supportive and how you might engage them in a conversation to understand their perspective? Would you do that also or not at this point?
Yeah, well, absolutely. At this point, you can talk to anybody and everybody, and actually the more diverse people you talk to, the more you can build in your idea. So with each conversation with each person, you can go back to your idea. Each conversation is literally a test to see how well these pieces are holding together. And each conversation is a great time to be able to adjust, adapt, build, learn how to make this idea even better. And each person you talk to, you're going to learn something new. So I love that point. Now, that person that doesn't necessarily support it might have some really interesting thoughts that will help you build it to be more robust. So the feedback that you get is very helpful. But what I wouldn't do is go back to that person before you have approval again.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so that's step 2 is securing the people and the resources. This is what I call kind of, there's different names for it, like socialization of the idea, if you've heard of that. Also networking. This is really a great way to network because you're getting visibility by doing this. You are showing up as a thought leader, literally, because you're bringing this new idea forward. So even if you, honestly, even if the idea doesn't go forward, you're building relationships, you're building credibility of being a thought leader, even through this process. And people are getting to know what you're passionate about and what is important to you, which is really important for them to know for future things when they come up and they're like, oh, wait, I remember this conversation with Dean or with Bob. Okay. So create a powerful idea, secure people and resources. The third step is do it and make it, which sounds straightforward, which sounds easy, but this new idea is a brand new thing that hasn't been made yet before. So there's likely no blueprint for it. So how do you do something? How do you create something that with so much uncertainty, so much unknown going forward? And this is tools where tools of innovation really come into play. And design thinking, if you've ever heard of like the iteration cycle. So the tool that you use is create, test, adjust, and then you do it again. And for the scientific folks, this is not a new concept, and I know that. But we often forget that you can do this outside of a lab, outside of technology, right? This works for ideas and bringing things to life. And literally the test, the conversations that you're having in step 2, even, those were tests. And as you think about the tests, you want to think about, as you go back to step 1, the pieces of your idea, you want to test each piece. You want to test if the customer, if you really know the customer, and if the messages that you're talking to with your customer are resonating. You want to test the solution, and if the solution is really working for your customer. And you want to test with your stakeholders, does this really fit in the organization? Can this run going forward? Uh-oh, my camera left.
There we go.
Am I back?
You're back.
I don't know what happened, but we'll
I,
keep going. So as you're doing your test iterations, it's really testing each piece of the idea, not just one. Oftentimes we'll think of testing just the solution, but really you need all three pieces to work and come together for this idea to really work and be sustainable long term. So test, do it, make it. And a key part with this also is to remember that when you test things and if they don't work, that's still moving forward because you are then adjusting and recreating. And that's a step forward in that step forward direction, because that's a lot of times where people get stuck or frustrated or end up stopping because things aren't working. So those are the three steps to building an idea, to innovative leadership that works in any organization. You don't need like a set process, because oftentimes we're looking for the process, right? Or being assigned something to be able to move it forward with the organization. You don't need that. So those are the three steps. Any questions?
well, so I'm going to monitor the chat, but I have one because it's all about me, even though you said earlier it's not all about you. But so I love all of that. I love the thought about how you're purposeful about stakeholders, about the customer, and about the solution, or what you're trying to do with innovation. One question I have, particularly related to the last bit, is, and this is a learning organization angle question. The concept of iterating and testing and moving through that cycle, incredibly powerful. Totally tracking with you there. Do you share the failures as you go through that cycle? Is it important to capture those and share them as you go through those cycles of, hey, here's what's not working, either with the stakeholders, with the customers, with the team, with any kind of like knowledge repository, because those are, I imagine, pretty important aspects of learning.
They're huge learning, and the sharing is really great, because especially when you do that learning internally within the organization, because what I've seen a lot of times is actually a lot of teams will farm that out to a vendor to do that learning. And so they'll come back with the answer, which is great. You'll be able to move forward, but you've lost a lot of valuable understanding of what didn't work and why this works more. And so honestly, when you farm that out of the organization, which often happens, you're losing so much. So by doing it yourself, you're keeping that knowledge and understanding, that depth of understanding within your organization. Even better, to your point, is being able to share that out. In my experience, sharing the thinking process and sharing the experiments, even just real quickly in bullet points, even informally with stakeholders and decision makers, builds so much trust with you and the team, even if it's failures, because they can see your thought process, they can see you're taking action, they can see what you're doing with the action they took, with things that you've learned, and how you are managing that situation to continue moving forward. So
God,
bringing your stakeholders along that journey is really powerful. It's a great question, Dean.
thank you. Thank you. And I see Bob Latino is unmuted. Bob, what are your thoughts here?
I guess I'm looking at this and having gone through this with my family and the reliability engineering part. The when you, I've always have found that when you have an idea, it's easier to sell by doing a pilot than it is to try to get the overall organization to adopt it. And that when you're doing it a pilot, that you're essentially making a business case to say how scalable is this pilot to do that, and in some measure, it doesn't always have to be financial. I have to figure out, how do I measure the effectiveness of a good idea that's been executed?
Amazing. Pilots are huge in being able to win over confidence and credibility of the idea. What you what you do, so in the beginning, that's why I mentioned when you need, when you're looking at who you need, right? Not everybody needs to like the idea or be able to dive into the idea before you do the pilot, right? But you do need somebody to give you a go ahead to run that pilot.
Right.
So it's really important to find that stakeholder that is willing to take that risk with you, right? To be able to do that. But what that does is it demonstrates what the impact actually is. So it's no longer theory, people can see it. And if you see it, people believe it. And so the big part for that you're talking about too is how do you demonstrate that impact? Sometimes it's literally through experience. It doesn't even have to be measurable, but people have to experience the impact or feel the difference of whatever you're doing to be able to believe and see how much different it is. Sometimes it is measurable. And sometimes it is more about a belief from a leadership of how important this is going to be for the organization. And those are the decisions that some leaders have to take is based on faith. And so being able to connect with your leaders, both with relationship of the idea, but also the trust in you that you're going to make this thing happen is really important.
Okay, thank you.
I have one more question, and then I'll just keep looking for others that might want to ask a question or make a comment, Laura, as we wind down here. But so it occurs to me that it takes a lot of courage and resilience to, if I'm a frontline person, I've got this concept that I think is really going to have an impact. I've thought about the customer, who the impact, who will be impacting and why it's important. I've thought about those that I want to engage in the conversation, but man, it takes a lot of courage for me to really raise that. Like, what's your coaching for people in that respect of, don't give up after one try? What are the words of wisdom that really help people go, yep, I'm all in?
One of the secrets that I found that is a key ingredient to lead an idea like this is that you personally need to have a passion for the outcome. Because if you are personally connected to the outcome, that is what's going to fuel you to keep going and how important it is. Because you're right, it takes more than just willpower here, because especially in innovation, most things, almost 99% of the time, do not work on the first try. And it doesn't always work on the second try either. You're going to run into challenge after challenge. And although, those rings are only 3 pieces, they can be complex pieces to fit together. There's a lot of factors that can go into that, depending on how big your idea is. And so having that connection, that deep understanding of why this is important to you to lead it is what's going to drive you forward. Oftentimes, especially within data and science, emotion is often taken away from the business in the workplace. But emotion is how we run as humans. It is the oldest part of our brain. And to connect ideas through your personal emotion, that is, literally, emotion is energy and motion. It's literally energy. It's literally the fuel that's going to keep you going forward. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you. And I'll pause there to see if there's any other hands up or people that are unmuted. Bob, you're still unmuted. You probably have a ton of thoughts, which you always do. Any other thoughts or questions you want to share, Bob?
No, I'm just looking at clarity. I mean, effectively, you could have the person you're appealing to is the customer, but that may not be the stakeholder. So that the customer may be the beneficiary of the idea, but not the person who has the purse strings to make it happen. Is that true?
That is very true. That is very true. So for example, my idea, of the innovation space, the customer was really just employees within my organization, right? My fellow peers, honestly. But the decision maker was not necessarily going to use the space at all. They had to see the value of it for the organization. So even though it's the same idea, you're likely going to have different messages depending on who you're talking to. So when you test the idea with the customer, right, you're going to talk about the benefits to them as the customer, as the person experiencing the space, using the space. But when I talk to my decision maker, I need to talk to them about the benefits that are important to them as a leader. And what's important to them as a leader? Growing the business, bringing in more innovation, having employee engagement, right? So even though it's the same idea, the pieces that I'm talking about within the idea change depending on who I'm talking to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's an age-old problem where when you're dealing with the soft sciences as
Yeah.
opposed to the physics sciences, is that when you're dealing in the end, and this is I come from the reliability engineering field, and I get it about the physics versus the social sciences. But when you're selling to people who have a budget, it's about the numbers. And we can go in and we can say that we want the trust, and we want the people to have the ability that they're not only being heard but they're being listened to. Eventually, those ideas have to convert into improving the operation as per your circle. So, and it's not always the easiest thing to do, is to take that energy of the people and then convert it to a business case to say, because we acted on these ideas, this operation, but it does. It does eventually convert. People just aren't good at making those business cases. But I mean, we wouldn't be doing these unless it was to benefit the operation.
Absolutely. There's something called innovation math,
Mhm.
which is different than, right, the engineering math, because engineering math is super precise. Innovation math is not. Innovation math is making guesstimates. But by making guesstimates, it puts numbers into place that paint a picture of what's possible.
Right.
You're not guaranteeing that's what's going to happen, but it says what's possible. And you need to paint pictures for people to see what's possible so that they can see what you see. And so, for instance, the innovation space, the benefit of the innovation space is you're going to be using external vendors less, because you're going to be doing the innovation work and you're having more inspiration and space to do it, and you're going to come up with better ideas. And so we can talk about how many dollars are saved of vendors not being used, right? That's one potential number that I could guesstimate. But yes, translating, that's the creative part that isn't always obvious. As much as it is in engineering, right? Engineering, the variables are all connected and you know what's influencing what. With innovation math, you have to think about creatively, what would that scenario look like in the future, and how would that be different? And what are those factors that are then in play because of this different scenario? So it does require different creative thinking.
Yeah,
And we,
and
oh, go ahead,
sometimes
Bob.
I guess when you look at that, when we say innovation, that it's this new crazy idea. Oftentimes, when people are fear and they underreport, they just don't talk anymore because nobody's listening to them. And then when you use innovation to get teams together, like the HOPS and learning teams and the proactive RCAs, now they're just bringing up things that are preventing them from doing the best job they can. And it may not be a revelation, but it's going to improve operations, because they're not gonna you're not gonna read that in a report somewhere because nobody's listening to them. So now you have an innovation space, and they feel like they've been heard and they're able to act on these things. And it may not convert to dollars, but it may convert to less safety incidents because they told you about a safety hazard that before they wouldn't have told you.
Ooh, I
Because
love that measure.
nobody was listening.
Absolutely. That's a great measure. And that's a great scenario of thinking of the impact of this new future, right? What does that new future look like? And how is that different then? How can you put that in numbers? Less safety incidents. That's amazing.
Dean, I think I've asked my quota of questions. I'll stand down.
And as always, they're insightful and really valuable questions. Thank you, Bob. And we have Ken Madsen. Ken has a question about customer experience and how that plays in here. So Ken, if you want to unmute yourself and jump in, love to hear from you.
Yeah. Hey, Laura. I'm just kind of getting new into this process. So I've got a lot of questions and maybe some of them are a little rookie, but that's all right. So when do you bring the customer in for the customer experience? You know, the think tank is in there. You're coming up with these ideas. You're pitching it up to your stakeholders, your decision makers. Sounds good, looks good. And you get through your testing and you adjust, you test, you adjust, and you think you have this good product. But then when you present that to the customer, when do you get that feedback? And how does that go back into that cycle of adjust, test again?
I love that. So when you're creating the idea, a lot of those things are assumptions, right? It's based off of what you think. Whether that's right or not, you're going to have to figure that out. I like to bring in the customer, if you can, even before you go to the stakeholder, because you want to know, you want to know if this idea is really going to work. Do you have any merit base that this is something the customer actually wants and is actually interested in? It doesn't have to be robust. It can literally be a conversation with like 3 people just to get a feel. It could be so informal, so off the cuff, so scrappy, so to speak. But a lot of times that's one of the things that's holding us back, honestly, is thinking that everything has to be official and big. But especially in the beginning of an idea, when it's still just growing, scrappy is amazingly helpful to make sure that you're testing little things, that the pieces are actually fitting together, because you want to challenge yourself on that. A lot of times things look awesome in your head, but then when you get it out and you put them like in real life together, like, this doesn't work. I've had that happen way too many times. So in the tiniest ways, if you're able to talk to your customer, literally like right after you have this idea, that's the best time. And then you just grow it, grow the confidence with your customer as you go through the process.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for your question, Ken.
And I'm just going to pause here to see if there are any others in the chat box or anybody else wants to unmute themselves and jump into the conversation or raise a hand and ask a question. And while I am doing that, I'm going to multitask. So Laura, we genuinely appreciate your time and your insights and how you've helped us think through how do we bring ideas to reality, and move forward when sometimes it's just, we don't know what the first step is. So painting those 3 steps and how to move forward, I think immensely valuable, whether it's a big idea or a small one, whatever it is that helps move things forward. We genuinely appreciate it.
Absolutely. Since we have a little time, there's one secret that I want to share. And this is something that often holds us back. And it held me back right in the beginning, is that actually you don't need to be an expert in your idea to lead it. We often think that you do, because especially within the technical realm, you often build your expertise, right? That's the role and that's the objective of your career, to be able to be credible and known. But when it comes to leading an idea and making something real, you don't need to be an expert. And oftentimes, if you're not an expert, that is even better. Why? Here's a story. There were once these two brothers that had a dream to fly. And maybe you know them, the Wright brothers. The Wright brothers, right, are credited with flight, with airplanes, with being able to mechanically fly. But there was also somebody else that was trying to build an airplane at the exact same time. Have you ever heard of Samuel Langley? You have, Dean. Most people haven't, right? And so Samuel Langley was doing this at the same time. He was actually a Smithsonian professor, and he had a grant to be able to do this work. It was $70,000 at the time, which equates to about 2 million now. And he had access to all the best experts and all these, super smart people to be able to build this amazing machine. And they did. They built this amazing machine, and they flew it, but it didn't fly, and it crashed in the Potomac River. Well, the Wright brothers ended up building their plane for $1,000, which is $28,000. They had no expertise in this space. They were bicycle salesmen. They didn't even build the bicycles. They just sold them. They weren't even mechanics. But they were curious. They were exploring. They had a passion and a drive, and they iterated. They created, tested, and adjusted. They started with a kite to understand what really works with flight. Then they went to a glider. Then they went to a plane. Okay. And so often, even with experts too, we have biases that we create in our brain, because then we have expectations of what we know. We don't look for the gaps in our knowledge anymore because we believe we know so much. So there's confirmation bias that comes in to play quite a bit when you're an expert, versus the curiosity, the testing, the looking for what really works, and putting those pieces together in creative and different ways from different experiences. So that's just something I wanted to bring up, because oftentimes we think we can't lead this idea, somebody else needs to, because you're not the expert in doing it, especially since that's usually your career goal, is to become an expert, but to lead an idea that is not required.
That's a great story.
Yeah, as a aside to that, I have a property that's about a mile from the Wright Brothers Museum at Kildover Hills, North Carolina. It's an extremely interesting tour that leads right to Laura's point. Highly recommend that tour.
That's so cool.
And
Awesome.
we have one more question from Clint about, Laura, are there any resources on the innovation cycle that you would recommend?
There's a lot of processes out there. There's a lot of different names for innovation. There's agile, there's design thinking, there's lean. All of those things really are around creating something and testing it, and then being able to learn from it and doing it again. So you can dive into any one of those and you're going to get value. I like to kind of cull it down to the simplest parts, to what really works, and that's really all you need. So as long as you continue to be curious, you continue to look for what's not working and what's working, and being able to continue building from there, and specifically using failure as a stepping stone to continue moving forward.
Yeah, to bolster her point is that it doesn't really, for me, it's never mattered about the tools, because a lot of them overlap with labels. It's the analysis is only as good as the analyst, and in this case, if the passion's not there, it doesn't really matter what tool you use.
I'm putting in my information into the chat. So there's my LinkedIn. Please connect with me. I'd love to be connected. I post daily on there with content around bringing ideas to life. Alternatively, you can email me. If you do message me on LinkedIn or email me, I'll send you a tool. It's called the solution statement. And this is what will help you to, number one, clarify your idea, because getting it out into words gets it out of your head, right? And that's really important, step one. But it also has all these different pieces of what makes a really important idea. So it's a lot like Mad Libs, where you literally just fill in the blanks. So it's pretty easy to use, but it's a single statement that cultivates your whole idea in a concise way so you can easily share it with somebody and they get it. Because haven't you had that where you try to explain your idea and you end up going for 15 minutes and you're like, oh gosh, this is not good. Do you get anything that I'm saying at all, right? I've had that so much. So this tool helps you to be able to do step two, is to share your idea so people can get it and give you feedback.
Thank you very much for that. Well, thank you very much for that offer. On behalf of everybody on the call, and Laura, thank you for your time and expertise. And I really appreciate the way you just wrap things up a bit at the end there with that thought of stay curious, because that's just so important in all of life. So thank you for sharing all of that. And then just those two words, super powerful.
It's
So
such a pleasure being here, Dean. Thank you so much. Thank you,
yeah.
Bob, as well.
And everybody, thank you for your time, and thanks for joining in and engaging in the conversation today. Everybody, if you haven't taken a look at the our community, CHOL learning.org, well, I'll put that in there, but I think you're all familiar with it because you've been here to register for the webinar. Take a look at our upcoming conference that is starts June 12th in Portsmouth. A lot of other great learning opportunities. And with that, Laura, thanks for your time. Thanks everybody for your time today, and have a great rest of your day.
Take care. Thank you.